Hey, welcome back to the Nero world. Today we're diving into another Nero Wolfe mystery, smart, sharp, and worth every minute. The orchids were behaving themselves that Tuesday morning, which meant Nero Wolfe was in a tolerable mood. I knew this, because he hadn't sent me on 3 pointless errands before 10 o'clock, hadn't corrected my grammar more than twice, and had consumed his orange juice without editorial comment. By the standards of the brownstone on West 35th Street, that practically qualified as a celebration. I was at my desk in the office, working through a stack of correspondence that had accumulated over the previous week, when the doorbell rang at 11:17. Fritz answered it, as Fritz always does, and a moment later appeared in the office doorway with the particular expression he reserves for visitors who seem to him either dangerous or expensive. "A Miss Vivienne Marsh," he said, directing this at Wolfe rather than at me, which was his way of indicating the visitor was worth the boss's attention. "She says it is urgent." Wolfe was behind his desk, a book open in front of him, something about the history of Byzantine coinage, which tells you everything you need to know about how he spends his mornings. He didn't look up immediately. He turned a page. Then, with the deliberateness of a man who has elevated procrastination to an art form, he closed the book and placed it to his left. "Show her in," he said. She came in the way certain women do, not dramatically, not timidly, but with the controlled composure of someone who has decided in advance how they intend to be perceived. Vivienne Marsh was somewhere in her mid-30s, with dark hair cut precisely at the jaw, a gray suit that cost more than my week's salary, and eyes that were almost exactly the color of new leaves in April. The eyes were her most notable feature, and she seemed to know it, because she used them the way a boxer uses a jab, establishing range before committing to anything serious. She took the red leather chair across from Wolfe's desk without being invited, which either meant she was accustomed to being in charge of rooms, or she'd done her research and knew that was where clients sat. I suspected both. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "my name is Vivienne Marsh. I am the managing director of Marsh & Collier Gemological Services. 4 days ago, an emerald worth $420,000 was stolen from our vault. Yesterday morning, my business partner, Edmund Collier, was found dead in his office with what the police are calling a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I don't believe it was self-inflicted. I believe Edmund was murdered to prevent him from revealing who stole the emerald. And I believe that if I don't find out who is responsible within the next 72 hours, I will be the next person they decide to silence." She said all of this with the measured cadence of someone who had rehearsed it, which didn't necessarily mean it wasn't true. It just meant she was organized. I found myself inclined to like her for that, even as I made a note on my pad that her hands, folded in her lap, were doing the thing hands do when their owner is more frightened than they're letting on. Wolfe regarded her for a long moment. He has a face that was built for regarding things, broad, heavy, impassive, with dark eyes that miss nothing and reveal nothing. He weighs 1/7 of a ton and moves as little as the furniture, but in those moments of assessment, he seems more alert than anyone I've ever known who was actually running somewhere. "You said 72 hours, he said. "Why that interval specifically?" She blinked. It was, I thought, not the question she'd expected first. "Because on Friday evening there is a scheduled board meeting of our parent holding company. Edmund and I each held 40% of the voting shares. The remaining 20% is held by a trust. If Edmund's death is ruled a suicide, his shares revert to the company under a clause in our partnership agreement, a clause Edmund himself insisted on 3 years ago. Whoever controls the company after Friday controls what happens to the investigation into the emerald. And whoever stole the emerald has a very strong interest in making sure that investigation goes nowhere." Wolfe's eyes moved to me briefly, then back to her. "Mr. Goodwin will take notes. The emerald first, its provenance, its current location before the theft, and the precise circumstances of its disappearance," she began, I wrote. The story that emerged over the next 40 minutes was, as these things usually are, more complicated than the summary she'd led with, and the complications were where the interesting parts lived. The emerald in question was called, somewhat grandly, the Orinoco Star, a 22-carat Colombian stone that had passed through 4 owners in the previous decade, before landing in the hands of a Geneva-based collector named Hartman, who had consigned it to Marsh and Collier for authentication, valuation, and potential private sale. The stone had been in their vault, in a building on East 47th Street, in the heart of the Diamond District, for 11 days before it vanished. The vault, this Marsh explained, required 2 keys to open. She held one. Edmund Collier had held the other. The vault log showed the last authorized entry was 9 days prior, when both she and Collier had entered together to show the stone to a prospective buyer. The alarm system showed no breach. The building's security cameras showed nothing unusual. And yet 4 days ago, when she had gone to retrieve the stone for a second viewing by a different prospective buyer, it was gone. And who, Wolfe asked, had access to the building after hours? 3 people have keycard access beyond myself and Edmund, our head gemologist, Dr. Paul Stern, our client liaison, a woman named Adaora Nwosu, and a private security consultant we retained 6 months ago, a man named Victor Lenz. And the prospective buyers who viewed the stone? The first viewing was with a representative of a Dubai investment group, a man named Kaspar Renner. The second viewing, the one I'd scheduled for the day I discovered the stone was missing, was to have been with a private collector, a Mrs. Helena Forsyth. I looked up from my notes. So Renner saw the stone. Mrs. Forsyth never got the chance. That's correct. When did you last speak with him? Something moved behind those green eyes. The night before his body was found. He called me at approximately 9 in the evening. He said he'd figured something out. Something about the stone. He said he needed to verify one thing before he told me what it was. He said he'd call me in the morning. She paused. He didn't call in the morning. His assistant found him at 8:15. The office was quiet for a moment. Outside, a taxi horn sounded on 35th Street, and then faded. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together and studied the ceiling, which is his version of intense activity. "The police," he said. "Inspector Kramer?" "Lieutenant Rowcliffe is handling it." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but I saw the faint adjustment in his posture that meant he'd filed that information, and found it significant. Rowcliffe is a conscientious officer who possesses, in Wolfe's view, the deductive imagination of a fire hydrant. His involvement meant the suicide ruling would be pursued with the full bureaucratic momentum of someone who has found the obvious answer and is disinclined to look for others. "Miss Marsh," Wolfe said, "I will take this case under one condition. You will answer every question I or Mr. Goodwin put to you with complete candor. If I discover you have withheld or misrepresented anything material, I will terminate the engagement immediately and bill you for time expended. Is that acceptable?" "It's acceptable." "Good." He named his fee. She didn't flinch, which told me either the money was insignificant to her or she was too frightened to care about it, possibly both. "Then I have one more question for now. When Collier called you that evening, the night before he died, was he frightened?" She considered this. "No," she said, at last. "He was excited." After she left, I swiveled my chair toward Wolfe's desk. He had reopened the Byzantine coinage book, but he wasn't reading it. He was doing his ceiling study routine, which meant the machinery was running. "So," I said, "a stolen emerald, a dead partner, and a board meeting on Friday that someone needs to control. That's 3 separate crimes or one very organized criminal." "Or," Wolfe said, without looking at me, "one moderately organized criminal who made one significant error." "Which error?" "That," he said, "is what we need to find out. Archie, I want background on all 5 names she gave us. Stern, Nwosu, Lenz, Renner, and Forsyth. Financials where accessible, professional histories, and any litigation or criminal record, by tomorrow morning." "And Collier's death?" The medical examiner's report, if you can obtain it through your usual disreputable channels, and the name of whoever benefits from Collier's shares reverting to the company. He finally looked at me. Someone went to considerable trouble to arrange a death that would pass as a suicide. That requires two things: proximity to the victim and sufficient knowledge of the victim's psychology to make the staging believable. Meaning someone who knew Collier well. Meaning someone who knew Collier well enough to know what a suicide would look like. He picked up his book. "Go, Archie, and tell Fritz I'll want the lamb saddle for dinner, not the veal. He'll understand." I got my coat and hat and went. The lamb saddle I could do nothing about. The background checks I could. On the street, the October air had the bright, cold quality of a fresh argument, and I walked toward the garage, feeling the particular satisfaction I always feel at the beginning of a case, before the complications multiply, before the danger becomes specific, before the neat categories of suspects and motives begin to blur and shift. It wouldn't stay neat for long. It never does. But for one morning, with the city clattering around me and 5 names in my notebook, it felt almost manageable. The Diamond District on East 47th Street is a place that conducts itself at 2 volumes simultaneously. The surface performance of quiet professionalism, all hushed showrooms and discreet security, and underneath it, the humming frequency of very large sums of money moving between people who trust each other precisely as far as contractual obligation requires. I'd spent the better part of Wednesday working the phones and the pavement, and by 4 in the afternoon, I had assembled enough material on our 5 candidates to fill a small dossier and develop a mild headache. The next morning, Thursday, Wolfe received them in sequence. This was his method. Individual interviews, no shared waiting room, no opportunity for the suspects to compare notes before sitting down across from him. I'd arranged it by telephone the previous evening, deploying the combination of authority and subtle pressure that I've developed over years of doing Wolfe's social heavy lifting. None of them were happy about the summons. All of them came. Dr. Paul Stern arrived first at 10 o'clock. He was a compact, precise man of about 50, with the manner of someone who has spent his professional life being the smartest person in the room and has developed a certain wariness about it. His credentials were genuine and impressive. A doctorate in mineralogy from Columbia, 15 years with Christie's before joining Marsh & Collier. He sat in the red chair, with his hands on his knees, and looked at Wolfe with the expression of a man attending a meeting he considers unnecessary, but is too professional to skip. "You were the last person with documented access to the building before the theft was discovered," Wolfe said, without preamble. Stern nodded. "My keycard shows I entered at 7:40 p.m. on the relevant evening and left at 9:20. I was working in my laboratory on the 3rd floor. I did not access the vault. I had no reason to." "And you were aware of the Orinoco Star's presence in the vault?" "I had authenticated it. Of course I was aware of it." "Its value?" "I valued it myself, 420,000 as a conservative estimate. The right buyer, in the right context, might pay considerably more." Wolfe's eyes were steady on him. "Dr. Stern, in your professional opinion, is a stone of that quality and provenance easily disposed of?" Something shifted in Stern's expression, a professional's discomfort at a question that implicates his field. "Not through legitimate channels. The stone is documented, certified, known. Any reputable dealer or auction house would flag it immediately. On the gray market," he stopped. "Please continue." "On the gray market, it could be broken down, cut into smaller stones that lose their individual identity. You'd lose 40% of the value, perhaps more, but it becomes untraceable." He paused. "It would require someone with gemological knowledge to do it properly. Someone like yourself." "Someone like several dozen people in this city alone," Stern said, with a controlled sharpness. "I want to be helpful, Mr. Wolfe, but I also want to be clear. I have worked in this industry for 26 years without a single allegation against my integrity. I did not steal the emerald." "I believe you," Wolfe said pleasantly, which caused Stern to blink. "That will be all for now, Doctor. Goodwin will show you out." When I returned, Wolfe was making a note on his pad. He didn't share it with me, which was normal. He shares things when he's ready to share them, and not before. Adaora Nwosu was next, at 11. She was younger than I'd expected, late 20s, with an easy confidence that sat differently on her than Stern's did on him. His was defensive, hers was just there, like good posture. She wore a blue wool dress and carried a leather portfolio that she set on her knee without opening. "I've already spoken to the police 3 times, she said, settling into the red chair. "I'm not sure what I can add." "Perhaps nothing," Wolfe said. "Perhaps something. You serve as client liaison, meaning you coordinated the viewings of the Orinoco Star?" "Both of them, yes." "Tell me about Caspar Renner." She did. Renner had come to them through an introduction from a Geneva contact, a connection of the stone's owner, Hartman. He represented, or claimed to represent, a consortium of Dubai investors who were diversifying into rare stones. He'd attended the first viewing with a second man whose name she hadn't caught, spent 40 minutes examining the stone under supervision, asked detailed technical questions, and left without making an offer. He'd said his clients needed time to consider. "His manner?" Wolfe asked. She thought about this with the care of someone who takes observations seriously. Professional, knowledgeable, more than I expected for someone presented as a financial representative rather than a specialist. He asked questions about the stone's cut and internal characteristics that most buyers wouldn't think to ask. A pause. He also asked about the vault security system. I thought at the time it was due diligence. And now? Now I think it was something else. Wolfe nodded slowly. "Miss Nwosu, in the days before the stone was discovered missing, and before Mr. Collier's death, did you notice anything unusual? Any change in behavior among your colleagues? Any unfamiliar visitors to the building? Any communication that struck you as odd?" She was quiet for a moment. That lasted precisely long enough to be interesting. "Edmund seemed distracted the last week, preoccupied. He twice canceled our regular Monday briefing, which he'd never done before." She hesitated. "And about 10 days ago, I saw him speaking with Victor Lenz in the corridor outside the vault. It was after hours. I'd come back to retrieve a file. They stopped talking when they saw me." "That will be all," Wolfe said. "Thank you for your candor." After she left, I perched on the corner of my desk. "Renner asking about the security system." "Noted," Wolfe said. "And Collier talking to Lenz outside the vault. That's interesting." "It is suggestive," Wolfe said. "There is a difference." Victor Lenz came in at noon and immediately made the room feel smaller. He was a large man, not fat, but solid in the way that buildings are solid, with a square jaw, pale blue eyes, and the particular alertness of someone trained to assess threats. He'd spent 12 years with a private security firm in Germany before coming to the States, and another 6 doing what he called security consulting for various financial and commercial clients. His record was clean. His manner was not unfriendly, but it was careful in the way that a loaded weapon in a holster is careful. He sat in the red chair as if conducting a threat assessment of it first. "Mr. Lenz," Wolfe said, "you were retained by Martian Collier 6 months ago. At whose request?" "Mr. Collier's," he said. His English was precise, lightly accented. "He contacted my firm. He said the company was expanding its handling of high-value consignments and wanted a professional security review and ongoing consultation." "Miss Marsh was aware of this?" A slight pause. "She was informed. My understanding was that Mr. Collier initiated the engagement, and Miss Marsh concurred. Your keycard access to the building. Necessary for conducting security assessments at various hours. Standard practice. The evening Miss Nwosu saw you speaking with Mr. Collier outside the vault room." The pale eyes didn't move. "I don't recall a specific incident of that kind." She recalls it quite specifically, I said, from my desk. About 10 days ago, after hours, she came back for a file. I spoke with Mr. Collier on numerous occasions in that building. I can't account for every conversation. Wolfe studied him. Mr. Lenz, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to understand that an evasive answer will be more damaging to your position than a candid one. Did Edmund Collier tell you at any point that he suspected someone of planning to steal the Orinoco Star? The pause this time was longer. Not the pause of someone searching their memory, but the pause of someone making a decision. He raised a concern, Lenz said at last. About 3 weeks ago, he said he had reason to think someone connected to the Renner viewing was not what they represented themselves to be. He asked me to look into Renner's background discreetly. And did you? I began to. What I found, I reported to Mr. Collier privately. What did you find? That Caspar Renner's connection to the Dubai consortium is, at best, tenuous. He has acted as a broker in several previous transactions involving high-value stones. 2 of those transactions resulted in subsequent theft claims, though Renner was never charged in either case. The office was very quiet. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. And you conveyed this to Collier? Yes, about 12 days ago. And 2 days after that, the stone disappeared. Yes. And 4 days after that, Collier was dead. Lenz said nothing, but something in the set of his jaw shifted, a tightening that could have been guilt, could have been grief, and could have been fear. I've been watching faces long enough to know that distinguishing between those 3 in the moment is harder than it sounds. Thank you, Mr. Lenz, Wolfe said. You may go. Caspar Renner came at 2 o'clock and arrived 12 minutes late, which was either arrogance or a statement. He was a thin, elegant man of about 45, with the kind of polished surface that suggests either genuine sophistication or an elaborate performance of it. He wore a charcoal suit and spoke with a faint European accent that I couldn't precisely locate. The kind of accent that might have been acquired rather than inherited. He showed no discomfort at being summoned. He showed, as far as I could tell, no particular emotion about anything. I understand you're looking into the unfortunate business with the emerald, he said pleasantly, settling into the chair. I'm happy to assist, though I can't imagine what useful information I could provide. I saw the stone once. It was beautiful. I reported to my clients that the price was above our target range. That was the end of my involvement. Your clients, Wolfe said. The Dubai Consortium. Correct. Their name? Meridian Capital Group. He produced a business card from his jacket pocket and set it on the edge of Wolfe's desk. You're welcome to contact them to verify my representation. Wolfe didn't pick up the card. During your viewing of the stone, you inquired about the vault security system. My clients would want to know that a stone they were considering purchasing had been properly secured during its consignment period. Wolfe's eyes were flat. Mr. Renner, your name appears in connection with 2 previous gemstone thefts, in which you were a prospective buyer prior to the thefts occurring. Renner smiled. I'm aware of that coincidence. It's been an unfortunate pattern. I was cleared in both cases. Being cleared of a charge and being innocent of a deed are not always congruent. I'm aware of that as well, Renner said equably. He was, I thought, a man who had been in difficult rooms before, and had learned to be comfortable in them. That in itself was information. One more question, Wolfe said. Where were you on the evening Edmund Collier died? At my hotel, the Biltmore. I had dinner in my room and made several calls to Geneva. The hotel records and phone records will confirm this. Thank you, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin. I walked Renner out. On the doorstep, he turned to me with the same pleasant smile. Your employer is very thorough, he said. He has his moments, I said. I hope he finds what he's looking for. A pause. I genuinely do. Whether he meant it was a question I filed away for later. Helena Forsyth arrived at 3:30 and was the most surprising of the 5. I had imagined, from the title of private collector, someone of a certain age and type, the elderly, cultured variety of wealthy person who acquires beautiful things as a form of autobiography. Helena Forsythe was perhaps 60. But she entered the room with the energy of someone running on a completely different fuel than the rest of us. She was small and quick, with white hair cut short, and sharp brown eyes that moved around the office with undisguised curiosity before settling on Wolfe. "You have a Theodore Decker," she said, pointing at the bookshelf to the right of the doorway. "First edition." "Second," Wolfe said. "Please sit down, Mrs. Forsythe." She sat, but she continued looking around the room as if cataloging it. What a peculiar place to conduct investigations. No file cabinets, no evidence boards, just books and that extraordinary desk. She focused on Wolfe. "I've heard of you. You solved the Baxter affair, didn't you? 8 years ago?" "7, Wolfe said. "Mrs. Forsythe, I know why I'm here. You want to know about my interest in the emerald." She crossed her legs and folded her hands. "I collect Colombian stones specifically. The Orinoco star came to my attention through a contact in the trade. I expressed interest, made an appointment for a viewing. The stone was gone before I could see it. I was disappointed. It's a remarkable piece by all accounts. But I fail to see how I'm relevant to its disappearance, given that I never actually laid eyes on it." "Your contact in the trade," Wolfe said. "Who informed you of the stone?" Something very brief and very controlled crossed her face. "A broker I've worked with, a man named Renner, Caspar Renner." The room held very still for a moment. "Renner informed you that the stone was available," Wolfe said, "and then separately attended a viewing himself as the representative of other buyers." "Yes. It struck me as slightly irregular at the time. But Renner operates in that way. He maintains multiple client relationships simultaneously. It's not unusual in the trade." "I see." Wolfe looked at the surface of his desk for a moment, then up. "Mrs. Forsythe, I'll be direct with you. A man is dead. A valuable stone is missing. Your name and Renner's name are both connected to this case in ways that may be significant or may be incidental. I'm asking for your complete cooperation." She looked at him steadily. "You'll have it," she said. "I didn't steal the emerald, Mr. Wolfe. I have enough money to buy it honestly, if I want something badly enough. And I didn't murder Edmund Collier, if that's what you're building toward. I've never met the man." "Did Renner speak to you about Collier?" "He mentioned him in passing when describing the consignment arrangement. Nothing substantive." "When did you last speak with Renner?" 4 days ago, before the theft became public knowledge." A pause. "He told me the viewing might need to be rescheduled. He didn't say why." After she left, the office settled into the particular silence that follows a lot of conversation. Wolfe sat behind his desk with his eyes closed, which meant he was doing the work that looks from the outside like resting. I poured myself a bourbon from the cabinet in the corner. It was past 4, and I'd earned it, and sat on the couch. "Renner," I said. "Obviously," Wolfe said, without opening his eyes. "He informed Forsythe about the stone. He attended a viewing himself. He asked about the security system. He has 2 prior theft associations. He's in it." "He is in it," Wolfe agreed. "The question is how deeply, and in what role. The theft of a stone that requires physical access to a secured vault demands either inside assistance or a very specific kind of technical knowledge. Renner is a broker. He may be the architect, or he may be the catalyst, meaning he provided the target and the opportunity, and someone else did the actual taking. Yes, and Collier, who was beginning to piece something together, was silenced before he could complete the picture." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Archie, I want to know about the holding company, the one that gets Collier's shares if his death is ruled suicide. Who controls it, who benefits, and who had the legal mechanism explained to them, and when?" I nodded, making a note. "You think this goes beyond the emerald?" "The emerald," Wolfe said, "may have been the beginning, not the end. Someone wants control of Marsh and Collier. The theft may have been intended to destabilize the firm, damage its reputation, create pressure. Collier's death accelerates the transfer of his shares. The board meeting on Friday completes it. He picked up his book. Whatever is being arranged, it has been arranged carefully. We have until Friday to disarrange it. That's optimistic, I said. I prefer to think of it as deadline appropriate, he said, and returned to the Byzantine coins. I finished my bourbon and picked up the telephone. There was work to do, and not much time to do it in. Thursday gave way to Friday morning, and the brownstone entered its regular rhythm. Wolfe up to the plant rooms from 9 to 11 for his daily 2 hours with the orchids. Fritz producing breakfast with the solemnity of a man who understands that good food is one of the few reliable things in a chaotic world. And me, at my desk, working through what I'd gathered. By the time Wolfe came down at 11 and positioned himself behind his desk with a cold bottle of beer, his preferred mid-morning compromise between abstinence and enthusiasm, I had enough to lay out a fairly detailed picture of the crime, including some pieces that changed the shape of it considerably. I started with Collier's death. Through a contact at the ME's office, who owes me a favor I've been carefully not collecting for 3 years, I'd gotten access to the preliminary findings on Edmund Collier. The official position was suicide, single gunshot wound, contact range, right temple, right-handed victim. The gun was registered to Collier himself, a .38 revolver he'd owned for 6 years, kept in his desk drawer. However, I said, reading from my notes, there are 2 things in the examiner's notes that Rowcliffe apparently found satisfactory, and I find interesting. First, there were traces of a sedative compound, specifically a benzodiazepine, in the toxicology. The concentration was below what the preliminary report called clinically significant, and it was flagged as potentially consistent with a prescribed sleep medication Collier was known to take. But the concentration, when I had a pharmacist friend look at the numbers, was at the higher end of what you'd call subtle. Wolfe regarded me, meaning he may have been sedated before the shot was fired. Enough to impair his resistance, maybe. Not enough to make it obvious. I moved on. Second, and this one I find more interesting, the report notes minor abrasions on Collier's left wrist, consistent with, and I'm quoting, possible contact with a restraining surface or object. The examiner's note suggests this is inconclusive and may be unrelated to the cause of death. But taken together with the sedative, Wolfe said, it suggests a staging. It suggests someone who knew what they were doing and came very close to doing it well. Wolfe was quiet for a moment, his beer forgotten. Collier was drugged, possibly restrained briefly, shot at contact range, and the scene was arranged to resemble a suicide committed by a right-handed man with his own registered weapon. He pressed his fingertips together. This required access to Collier's office after hours. It required knowledge of where the gun was kept. And it required either a key or an accomplice who could provide access. The building's security log, I said. I talked to the management company. Collier's keycard was used to enter the building at 11:40 p.m. on the night he died. His body was found at 8:15 the next morning. His keycard, Wolfe said. Not necessarily Collier himself. Correct. And here's where it gets interesting. I turned a page in my notes. The security camera on the building's rear service entrance, not the main entrance, which has a camera that was functioning properly, was reported as malfunctioning starting at 11 p.m. that night. Maintenance request filed the following morning. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. The malfunction was convenient. Remarkably, the main entrance camera shows Collier entering at 7:40 p.m. and not leaving. It does not show anyone entering after that until the building manager at 8 a.m. The service entrance, Wolfe said. The service entrance, I confirmed. Someone who knew the camera was down, or who arranged for it to be down. I let that sit for a moment, then moved on to the second part of my report, the holding company. Marsh and Collier Gemological Services was a subsidiary of a holding company called Stratton Group Limited, incorporated in Delaware with offices in New York and Geneva. The Stratton Group had 3 directors, Vivian Marsh, Edmund Collier, and a corporate entity called Helios Advisory Partners. Helios Advisory Partners, through a chain of registrations that took me 2 hours and a bottle of aspirin to trace, was ultimately controlled by a management trust. The trustee of record was a law firm. The beneficial owner, as far as I could determine from public filings, was described only as a private individual. I can't get the beneficial owner's name from public records, I said, but I can tell you that Helios Advisory Partners holds 20% of Stratton Group. If Collier's 40% reverts to the company under the partnership clause, the board composition shifts dramatically. Whoever controls Helios controls the combined 60%. Wolfe looked at the ceiling. And the partnership clause that Collier himself insisted on 3 years ago. Under what circumstances would a man insist on a clause that so disadvantages his own estate in the event of his death? If he trusted the other party completely, or if he was pressured into it. Or, Wolfe said, if at the time he believed himself unlikely to die before his partner. He brought his gaze back down. Who benefits from control of Marsh and Collier? That's where it gets murky. The company itself is profitable, but not spectacularly so. The value isn't in the ongoing business. It's in the client list, the vault, the certifications, and the relationships. In the right hands, it's a vehicle for moving high-value stones through apparently legitimate channels. The room was quiet. A laundering operation, Wolfe said, or the infrastructure for one. That would explain the interest in control, and it would explain why someone wanted Collier gone before he could report what he'd found out about Renner. Wolfe reached for his beer, took a long drink, and set the bottle down with a deliberateness that I recognized. He was fitting pieces together, testing them against each other, discarding arrangements that didn't hold, and keeping those that did. "Archie," he said, "tell me about the building's service entrance. Who has access to it?" "Same keycard system as the main entrance. The logs were, and this is the third convenient thing, partially corrupted for the relevant evening. The building management company is describing it as a system glitch." "3 convenient things," Wolfe said softly. "A malfunctioning camera, a corrupted log, a sedative in the victim's blood that was almost, but not quite, in a clinically unremarkable range." He paused. "Someone competent, but not perfect. Someone who planned carefully, but not flawlessly." "Lenz," I said. "He has security expertise. He would know how building systems work." "He would," Wolfe agreed, "but expertise in security systems is not unique to Victor Lenz, and we should not permit the convenience of his background to substitute for evidence." He stood up, which for Wolfe is a significant event. He doesn't do it casually. He moved to the window that looks out onto the brownstone's front steps and stood with his hands clasped behind him. "What connects Renner to the inside of this operation?" he said. "Not theoretically, specifically. Who inside that firm would have reason to work with him?" I thought about it. Lenz was hired by Collier. If Collier was suspicious of Lenz later, if Collier figured out that Lenz had helped Renner with the security information, then Lenz had a powerful motive to silence Collier before he could act on that suspicion, Wolfe said. Yes, and Renner had motive to want the stone stolen and its ownership obscured. And someone behind Helios Advisory Partners has motive to gain control of the company. Are those 3 different people, or one? Wolfe turned from the window. That is the question I intend to answer. Archie, I need one more piece of information. The Orinoco Star's insurance. Who holds the policy, and who are the beneficiaries in the event of theft? I hadn't looked into that. I told him so. "Do so this afternoon," he said. "And I want Renner's hotel records verified, his claimed alibi for the night of Collier's death." He moved back toward his desk with the measured gravity that always makes me think of ocean liners changing course. "Also, find me everything available on Helios Advisory Partners. Bank records we can't obtain legally, but corporate filings, registered agents, any litigation history." "You're building a wall," I said. I'm building a corner, he corrected. Walls come later, corners come first. He sat down, reached for his book and then set it aside. He picked up his notepad instead and began writing, which told me the case had reached the stage where it was more alive in his head than anything a book could offer. I got my coat and hat and went back out into the city to keep building his corner. By 6 that evening, I had 3 more pieces. The first, Renner's alibi, held up technically, but not completely. The hotel confirmed he'd ordered room service. The phone records showed calls to Geneva. But the hotel concierge, when pressed with a description and a $20 bill, recalled that a man matching Renner's description had used the service exit between approximately 10 p.m. and midnight. The concierge hadn't thought much of it at the time. The second, the Orinoco Star, was insured through a specialty underwriter for $450,000. The policy had been taken out by the consigning owner, Hartman, in Geneva. The lost beneficiary, however, the party entitled to file and receive the claim in the event of theft during consignment, was Marsh and Collier. Wolfe, when I told him this, said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, and if Marsh and Collier is controlled by Helios Advisory Partners, the insurance payout flows to them, along with the stone itself, presumably, laundered through whatever channels Renner operates. The stone and the insurance claim, Wolfe said. They intended to collect both. The third piece was the most significant, and I'd gotten it from a corporate attorney contact who does work I occasionally refer his way. Helios Advisory Partners had been formed 18 months ago. Its registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington. But the formation documents had been notarized by a specific notary whose stamp appeared on other documents connected to— I paused here for effect, partly because I'd earned it— Victor Lenz's security consulting firm. Not proof, not even close to proof, but a thread that connected Lenz to Helios and Helios to the whole architecture of the scheme. Wolfe listened to all of it, finished his second beer of the evening, and said, "The board meeting is tomorrow." "Friday evening at 7, I confirmed. "Then tomorrow morning," Wolfe said, "I am going to need all of them here." "All 5? "All 5. And Miss Marsh." He looked at me with something that on a face less habitually impassive might have been called satisfaction. "Now we build the wall." They came at 10 o'clock Friday morning, summoned with enough urgency in my telephone calls to produce compliance, if not enthusiasm. Vivienne Marsh arrived first and took the red chair, which by now she treated as hers by prior claim. I arranged additional chairs in a loose semicircle, a geometric arrangement that is Wolfe's preferred architecture for these gatherings, creating enough separation between suspects to prevent coalition, while forcing everyone to address the center. Lenz came in and chose the chair farthest from the door, which put his back against the bookcase. Security instinct. Stern sat with his hands on his knees again, precisely as he had before. Ador and Wosu had a small notebook of her own, which she opened and held ready without explanation. Renner settled in with the easy posture of a man at a business lunch. Helena Forsythe looked around the room with the same cataloging interest as before, and sat next to Miss Marsh. Wolfe was behind his desk. He waited until everyone had arranged themselves and the room had reached a particular kind of charged stillness. Then he began. "I appreciate your attendance," he said, with a formality that suggested he found it unsurprising rather than generous. "I intend to be efficient. I have established to my satisfaction the essential facts of both the theft and Mr. Collier's murder. What remains is to confirm certain details and to give each of you an opportunity to add or correct anything before I deliver my conclusions." "Murder?" Stern said sharply. "Murder," Wolfe said. "Mr. Collier was drugged, incapacitated, and shot. The staging as suicide was competent but imperfect. The medical examiner's preliminary findings, properly interpreted, support this conclusion, and I expect the police to reach it as well within the next several days, when the full toxicology report is completed. The room processed this differently according to who was in it. Miss Marsh's hands tightened in her lap. Nwosu's pen moved briefly across her notebook. Lens's expression didn't change at all, which was itself an expression. Renner's pleasant surface held, but something behind his eyes recalculated. Forsyth looked sharply at Renner. "I'm going to describe what happened," Wolfe said, "and I want each of you to listen carefully. Mr. Renner, you came to view the Orinoco Star in your capacity as a representative of buyers. That capacity was, in part, genuine. You do maintain relationships with investment clients. But your primary purpose in attending the viewing was reconnaissance. You needed to understand the security arrangements, the vault access protocols, and the physical layout of the building. You came with that purpose because you had already identified a partner inside the firm." Renner said nothing. His face was pleasant. It was the pleasantness of a man who has decided that pleasantness is the correct strategy for this moment. "That partner," Wolfe continued, "provided you with information about the security system, the vault key protocol, and the schedule of the building's camera coverage. 2 days after your viewing, the Orinoco Star disappeared from the vault without a triggered alarm and without a logged entry." "The vault requires 2 keys, Lens said from the back of the room. His voice was careful. "2 people must enter together." "Yes," Wolfe said, looking at him directly, "which is why the theft required either that both key holders were involved, or that one key holder created access by other means." He paused. "A skilled security professional, with knowledge of the vault mechanism and access to the building's systems, could potentially address the second key requirement through manipulation of the electronic logging system. Not the vault lock itself. That is purely mechanical, but the log record of who entered." The room was very still. "Mr. Lens," Wolfe said, "you were retained by Edmund Collier 6 months ago. Mr. Collier, who was by all accounts a methodical and perceptive man, began to have doubts about your engagement approximately 3 weeks before his death. He asked you to investigate Renner. You conducted that investigation, reported back to him, and simultaneously recognized that Collier was becoming dangerous to the arrangement you'd made." "This is speculation," Len said. His voice was flat, controlled. "It is inference. The distinction matters, Archie." I pulled out my folder. "The notarized formation documents for Helios Advisory Partners," I said. "The notary's stamp appears on documents associated with Lens Security Consulting, LLC. The same notary, the same 6-month window." Lens looked at the folder. His jaw tightened. "Helios Advisory Partners," Wolfe said, "holds 20% of the Stratton Group, which controls Marsh and Collier. If Mr. Collier's death is ruled a suicide, this 40% reverts to the company. Helios, in that scenario, controls the majority. The firm becomes, or rather, can be made into, a vehicle for moving stones of questionable provenance through legitimate certification channels." "That's my firm," Vivian Marsh said, in a voice that was very quiet and very hard. "Yes," Wolfe said, "your firm was the target. The emerald was both the financing mechanism through theft plus insurance claim and the demonstration of capability. A firm that could lose a $400,000 stone without explanation, whose partner died of apparent suicide under the pressure, is a firm whose remaining principal might be persuaded to sell or step aside or cooperate." "You said I might be next," Miss Marsh said. "You were right. You were aware of it. That speaks well of your instincts." Wolfe shifted his attention. "Mrs. Forsyth." She looked at him steadily. "I'm listening. You were brought into this by Renner. You were told the stone was available through legitimate consignment. You were a genuine prospective buyer, but your involvement served a secondary purpose. Your appointment for a second viewing provided cover. If questions arose about the theft's timing, a second interested buyer in the queue provided the suggestion that the stone had wider exposure and more potential leaks." "I was being used," she said flatly. "You were. I don't believe you knew it." He looked at her a moment longer. "Did Renner at any point suggest to you that the stone might be available at below its certified value?" "He mentioned, casually, that the owner was motivated to sell, that there might be room to negotiate." "A distressed sale," Wolfe said. Yes, that would have completed the picture nicely. The stone disappears, the insurance claim is filed, and then a stone matching the Orinoco star's description, but carrying different documentation, appears on the private market at a reduced price, sold to a discreet collector who asks no difficult questions. He let that land. I don't believe that was your intention, Mrs. Forsyth, but it would have been the outcome. She looked at Renner with an expression that would have concerned me if I were him. He didn't look back at her. Dr. Stern, Wolfe said. Stern sat up straighter. I had nothing to do with this. I believe you, Wolfe said again, with the same pleasantness as before. But you authenticated the stone, and your certification would have been used to establish a provenance chain for any subsequent resale. Were you approached by anyone, Renner, Lenz, anyone else, with any proposal relating to the stone's documentation? Stern's expression shifted into something complicated. Not directly, but approximately 2 weeks ago I received an email, anonymous, asking whether I'd be willing to provide a supplementary certification for a stone with certain characteristics. The description matched the Orinoco star closely enough that I recognized it. I deleted the email and didn't respond. You didn't report it? I said from my desk. I wasn't certain what it was. In retrospect, he stopped. In retrospect, Wolfe said, it was a probe, testing whether the certification chain could be corrupted. He looked around the room. That probe's failure meant the plan required adjustment. Without legitimate certification, the stone's value on any private market is significantly reduced. The insurance claim becomes more important. He reached for his beer, drank, and set it down. Miss Nwosu, he said. She looked up from her notebook. I've told you everything I know. You have, Wolfe agreed. The conversation you observed between Mr. Collier and Mr. Lenz outside the vault 10 days ago. At that point, Collier had received Lenz's report on Renner. He was beginning to understand what Lenz's information meant, not just that Renner was suspicious, but that Lenz himself might be compromised, given that Lenz's investigation had somehow not produced the obvious result of reporting the theft risk to anyone but Collier privately. Nwosu nodded. Edmund was sharp. If he started seeing the shape of it, he would have moved quickly, Wolfe said, and quickly was not something the other party could afford. He turned back to Lenz. You knew that. On the night Edmund Collier died, you entered the building through the service entrance, whose camera had been arranged to malfunction. You had Collier's keycard. It's possible you duplicated it at some earlier point, which is the kind of technical matter a security consultant is well positioned to accomplish. You used a sedative, probably in a drink or food you'd arranged to have left in Collier's office. He was working late, which you knew because you monitored the building access logs as part of your security contract. When the sedative took effect, you staged the scene. I want a lawyer, Lenz said. That is certainly your right, Wolfe said pleasantly. Mr. Goodwin, please call Inspector Kramer. I picked up the phone. The evidence you have, Renner said quietly, is circumstantial. Much of it, yes, Wolfe agreed, but the phone forensics from Mr. Collier's office that evening will show calls or activity that can be mapped. The sedative compound in Mr. Collier's blood will be fully analyzed. The security camera malfunction will be traced to whoever initiated the maintenance request, which I expect will lead back to access credentials associated with this building's security contract. He looked at Renner calmly. And the Orinoco star itself, Mr. Renner, where is it now? Renner said nothing. It hasn't been cut, Wolfe said. The plan went sideways too quickly. It's somewhere, and when it's found, the person in possession of it will have a great deal to explain. Kramer came on the line. I told him to come to West 35th Street, that Wolfe had something for him and to bring enough people to be useful. He made a noise that combined irritation and professional resignation in equal parts, and said he'd be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and looked at the room. Lenz was sitting very still. Renner was looking at the middle distance, with the expression of a man recalculating probabilities. Forsyth looked furious. Stern looked pale. Nwosu was writing in her notebook. Vivian Marsh was looking at Wolfe with an expression I can only describe as ferocious relief. "The board meeting," she said. "Tonight." "Will proceed as scheduled," Wolfe said, "with Mr. Collier's shares properly handled by his estate, pending legal proceedings. I would suggest you bring your own attorney." He looked at her. "Also, you may want to have your own keycard and access credentials audited. Someone has been in the vault. They may have left traces." "The stone," she said, "the Orinoco star. If it hasn't been cut, there's a reasonable chance it will be recovered. Stone thieves, when their plans collapse, frequently find themselves holding property they cannot dispose of." He turned to me. "Archie, please show Mr. Renner and Mr. Lenz to separate rooms until the inspector arrives. They should not have the opportunity to coordinate." "With pleasure," I said. Lenz stood up, and for one moment he looked at Wolfe with the steady, measuring gaze of a man assessing options. Whatever he found in Wolfe's expression, which was precisely nothing, as usual, apparently ruled out the options he'd been considering. He moved toward the hall. Renner stood, straightened his jacket, and said, "I'd like to make a call." "After the inspector arrives," I said, and held the door. Friday afternoon was the kind of afternoon that happens after large things. A strange suspension, the day continuing its business while something significant has quietly concluded and hasn't quite settled into the past yet. Kramer had come and gone, taking Lenz and Renner with him. The others had dispersed. Wolfe had retreated to the plant rooms for a supplementary hour with the orchids, which was his version of unwinding. I sat at my desk and wrote up my notes while they were still warm, because in my experience, the details that seem obvious in the moment have a way of becoming ambiguous by morning. The picture, as I wrote it down, looked like this. Victor Lenz had been recruited, or had positioned himself, or some combination of both, as the inside man. His retention by Collier 6 months ago, around the same time Helios Advisory Partners was being incorporated, was not a coincidence. He'd come in as a security consultant and used that role to map the building systems, understand the vault protocol, and establish himself as a trusted presence. When the Orinoco star arrived, the operation moved to the next phase. Renner's role was acquisition and disposal. He knew the buyers, the channels, the private markets where a stone could change hands without public documentation. He'd attended the viewing to complete his technical understanding of the stone, and to assess the security setup that Lenz had already briefed him on. The theft itself had been clean, in the sense that it left no obvious traces. The vault log could be manipulated at the electronic level, not the physical mechanism, but the record of who accessed it. A man with Lenz's access to the building systems could create a gap in the record. The stone was removed, and the discovery delayed for days, because neither Marsh nor Collier had immediate reason to check on it. What had disrupted the plan was Collier. He'd been sharper than anticipated, and quicker. When he'd tasked Lenz to investigate Renner, and Lenz had come back with a report designed to satisfy, without revealing, a report that acknowledged Renner's suspicious background while steering away from the obvious conclusion, Collier hadn't been satisfied. He'd kept pulling the thread. And on the night of his death, he'd told Vivian Marsh that he'd figured something out and needed to verify one more thing. What that one thing was, I didn't know yet, but I had a theory. I went out at 2 o'clock to verify it. The building on East 47th Street was accessible through the building management company who'd been cooperative with Kramer's people, and were, by the time I arrived, somewhat shell-shocked and very eager to be helpful. I asked to look at the vault itself, which required Vivian Marsh's authorization. I called her from the lobby, and she gave it over the phone, and the building manager, a harassed man named Doyle, walked me down. The vault was in the basement. It was a standard commercial gem vault, a thick steel door with 2 independent locking mechanisms, one on each side of the frame, designed so that both keys had to be inserted and turned simultaneously, or near simultaneously, within a 10-second window. I looked at it for a while. Then I asked Doyle about the vault's maintenance history. He pulled up records on a tablet. The vault had been serviced 7 months ago, right around the time Lens was brought on, by a company called Meridian Building Systems. Meridian. I thought about Renner's business card. Meridian Capital Group. The same name was probably a coincidence. These things sometimes are. But, in my experience, in a case with this many moving parts, coincidences develop a certain characteristic smell, and this one had it. I called a contact at the Secretary of State's office and asked about Meridian Building Systems, incorporated in New York. While I waited for the callback, I walked to a coffee shop on 48th Street and sat with a cup and my notes. The callback came in 20 minutes. Meridian Building Systems had been incorporated 14 months ago. Its registered agent was a firm in Manhattan. One of its founding officers was listed as, I stopped and read it twice, Helena Forsythe. I sat with that for a moment. Then I called Wolfe. He answered on the second ring, which means Fritz picked up the extension in the kitchen and carried the phone up to the plant rooms, which he does when he thinks the call is important. Yes, Wolfe said. Meridian Building Systems, I said. Vault maintenance contractor. 7 months ago. Incorporated 14 months ago. Helena Forsythe is a founding officer. The phone was quiet for 4 seconds. Come home, Wolfe said. I was back at the brownstone by 4. Wolfe was in his chair behind his desk, beer in hand, with the particular stillness that means the machinery is running at full speed. She knew, I said, sitting down across from him. She wasn't a peripheral victim. She was in it. Not necessarily in the theft itself, Wolfe said slowly, but she knew the infrastructure. Meridian Building Systems was incorporated to provide inside access to the vault. Under the cover of routine maintenance, someone could examine the mechanism, understand the key system, potentially create the conditions for later access. Forsythe may not have planned the murder, but she was not the innocent bystander she represented herself as. And she sat in that chair yesterday and told you she'd been used. She told me a version of events designed to establish her distance from the act of crime while protecting the parts of the arrangement she controlled. Wolfe drank his beer. She is not the first person to sit in that chair and lie with accomplished composure. She will not be the last. Does Kramer know? Not yet. I want to be certain before I redirect his attention. Kramer has a limited appetite for pivots once he's fixed on a direction. He set the bottle down. The vault maintenance visit 7 months ago. Who authorized it within the firm? I thought. It would have been before Lenz arrived, so either Collier or Marsh. Or someone acting on their behalf. A facilities manager, an administrative assistant. He looked at me. Find out. Tonight if possible. I picked up the phone. Vivienne Marsh, when I reached her, was somewhere loud. She seemed to be at a lawyer's office, preparing for the board meeting. But she put me on hold and came back 2 minutes later. Our office manager authorizes building maintenance, she said. Her name is Patricia Sims. She'd have the records. Patricia Sims was reachable, and once I explained who I was working for, willing to check. She called back in 15 minutes. The maintenance visit by Meridian Building Systems had been authorized by a written request on Marsh and Collier letterhead, Edmund Collier's signature, which meant either Collier had authorized a maintenance visit that opened his firm's vault to tampering, or someone had forged his signature. I relayed this to Wolfe. Forged, Wolfe said, without hesitation. Collier was suspicious of Renner, and was investigating him. He would not have authorized a visit from a company connected to that network. Compare the signature to authenticated samples. That'll take time. Then start now. I got scans of the maintenance authorization and 3 authenticated Collier signatures from documents Vivienne Marsh had on file. I sent them to a handwriting consultant I've used before, with a request for a rush assessment. By 8 that evening, she came back. The maintenance authorization signature had characteristics inconsistent with the authenticated samples. Not definitive forgery. She was careful about that, but significant enough to warrant expert examination. It was enough for my purposes. I wrote it all up and put it on Wolfe's desk, and he read it at 9 o'clock, while Fritz brought in a plate of cold chicken and some bread, because we'd both forgotten dinner in the particular way that happens when a case is in its final stretch. Wolfe read the report twice, ate a piece of chicken without seeming to notice it, and looked up. "Call Kramer in the morning," he said. "Tell him we have an addition to what we gave him this afternoon. Forsyth, and the Meridian connection." He pushed the report aside and looked at the ceiling. "There is one piece I'm still working on." "What piece?" "The specific thing Collier said he had figured out, the thing he needed to verify." Wolfe's eyes were distant. "He told Miss Marsh he'd call her in the morning." He was excited, not frightened. He had not yet realized the danger. "Which means—" He stopped. I waited. "Which means," he said, "that what he had figured out was not that Lenz was dangerous. He already suspected that. It was something else, something specific, a piece of evidence he could point to." He looked at me. "His office, was it searched by the police?" "Routinely. Kramer's people went through it." "And found nothing of significance?" "Not that they mentioned." This, at 9:15 on a Friday evening, was unusual enough that I put down my chicken. "Archie," he said, "I need you to go to Collier's office tonight. The police will have sealed it. You have resources," he said. "Use them." He looked at me with the direct, calm authority of a man who has never personally had to talk his way past a police seal, and never intends to. Look for something small, something he would have considered a verification, a document, a photograph, a recording. Something he found that confirmed what he suspected. The police would not have known what to look for. "What am I looking for?" "I don't know precisely, but I believe Collier hid it. He was excited, not frightened. He thought he had time. He didn't anticipate how quickly events would move. Which means he may have left it somewhere in that office, believing he would retrieve it himself in the morning." I got my coat. It was going to be that kind of evening. It was exactly that kind of evening. The building on East 47th Street was quiet at 10 p.m. There was a police seal on Collier's office door on the 4th floor, but the officer assigned to watch it had apparently decided that watching could be done as effectively from the coffee cart in the lobby as from the hallway, and I had 15 minutes with the lock before anyone had reason to object. Collier's office was the kind of space that told you things about its occupant, orderly but not sterile, with a quality of precision that suggested a man who thought in categories. His desk had been gone through by the police, drawers open, papers shifted, but the room itself was intact. I looked for the kind of place a precise, methodical man would hide something small in a hurry. Behind the framed diploma on the wall, nothing. Under the desk pad, nothing. In the back of the bottom file drawer, behind the hanging folders, there. A small envelope taped to the back panel. Inside, a USB drive, and a single handwritten note that said in neat block letters, "Meridian equals Forsyth. Vault access 314. Check Len's phone records, same dates." I photographed it with my phone, put it back, and left the office the way I found it. On the sidewalk outside, I called Wolfe. It was 10:40 p.m. "He knew," I said. "He'd traced Meridian to Forsyth. He'd connected Lenz's phone records to the dates of the vault maintenance. He probably had it all on the drive. He hid it because he intended to bring it to someone official in the morning." Wolfe was quiet for a moment. Then he told Miss Marsh he needed to verify one more thing. What remained to verify? Maybe the phone records. Maybe he needed one more connection. "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "Come home, Archie, and call Kramer. I want him to know about the envelope before morning. Officially, it needs to be found properly." I called Kramer from the car. He was not delighted to hear from me at 10:40 p.m., but he was professional enough to be interested, and when I told him what I found and where, His tone shifted from irritated to attentive. He said he'd send someone. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was still in his chair, and Fritz had left a plate for me on the table by the window. I ate standing up, which Fritz would have found distressing if he'd seen it. Forsyth coordinated the vault access, I said between bites. Lenz provided the inside security knowledge. Renner handled acquisition and disposal. And someone incorporated Helios Advisory Partners to capture the company once Collier was removed. Yes, Wolfe said. Who controls Helios? I believe, Wolfe said, that we are about to find out. The structure of the scheme, the layers, the corporate shells, the sophistication, suggests someone with significant financial and legal resources. Someone who operates through intermediaries. He looked at me. Mrs. Forsyth is wealthy. She has moved in financial circles for many years. The question is whether she is the architect or another intermediary herself. The USB drive might answer that. It might, Wolfe said. Kramer's technical people will have to process it. That will take time. He reached for his book. The Byzantine coinage had reappeared, and then set it aside again. It doesn't matter for tonight. We have enough. The rest is detail. You sound unusually satisfied. I am, he said, without embarrassment. When the logic holds, and it holds. He looked at me with something that might have been warmth, if you knew where to look. Go to bed, Archie. Tomorrow will be sufficiently eventful. It was, as usual when Wolfe says things like that, an understatement. Saturday morning arrived with the gray, efficient quality of a city getting back to business, after being briefly interrupted by events. I was at my desk by 8 with coffee, and by 8:30 Kramer called. The USB drive had been recovered from Collier's office as I'd directed. Its contents were, according to Kramer, substantial. Collier had been meticulous, which I could have predicted. The drive contained a spreadsheet tracing Meridian Building Systems Incorporation to Helena Forsyth through a chain of nominee directors, screenshots of phone communications between a number associated with Victor Lenz and a Geneva number that Collier had annotated as Renner's Swiss office, and a partial document, apparently a draft, of a written analysis Collier had been preparing for delivery to the New York District Attorney's Office. Collier, it turned out, had figured out nearly everything. He'd been one phone call from being ready to act. That phone call, if it had been to verify the Geneva connection, was what he'd told Vivian Marsh he needed to make. He was almost there, I told Wolfe. Almost, Wolfe agreed, is sometimes the most dangerous place to be. The Orinoco Star was recovered at 11 that morning. Kramer people, working from information about Lenz's secondary address, a storage unit in Queens that appeared in leasing records his financial background check had surfaced, found it in a climate-controlled lockbox inside, along with documentation that had been prepared for its eventual resale under a different certification number. The stone was undamaged, which made the Geneva owner very happy, and the insurance underwriter considerably less nervous. Lenz, by early Saturday afternoon, had retained a lawyer and was in the process of negotiating what cooperation might be worth to him. Renner had been more tightly closed, but according to Kramer, was showing signs of calculating that silence was becoming increasingly expensive. When investigators reached the Geneva number Collier had flagged, the person at the other end proved to be a lawyer who also served as a registered agent for 3 of Renner's corporate entities, and separately as the formation agent for Helios Advisory Partners. Helena Forsyth was brought in for questioning at 2 p.m. Saturday. By 3, in the context of what was being laid in front of her, she'd begun to speak. She wasn't the architect. She was, as Wolfe had suspected, another layer. The beneficial owner behind Helios Advisory Partners was a European investor she named, a man already under investigation by Interpol and 3 national financial regulators for a pattern of acquiring and exploiting specialty financial service firms. Forsyth had been recruited as a fixer, the person who provided American corporate infrastructure, local relationships, and a face that looked like old money rather than organized crime. She knew about the murder? I asked Kramer. She says she didn't authorize it. She says Lenz acted on his own when Collier became a threat to the timeline. A pause. She's probably telling the truth about that specific thing. The authorization trail points elsewhere. It pointed, ultimately, to the European investor who had never set foot in New York, whose plan had been designed precisely so that no operational decisions came from him directly. Whether that insulation would survive a serious prosecution was a question for prosecutors smarter than me. The board meeting had been postponed, by mutual agreement and on advice of counsel, pending resolution of the criminal proceedings. Vivian Marsh remained the controlling party at Marsh & Collier, with Collier's shares properly frozen by the estate. The Friday deadline had come and gone without the result anyone had arranged for. That evening, after the calls and the paperwork and Kramer's final debrief had finished, I sat in the office with Wolfe and reported the full sequence. He listened with his eyes closed and his hands pressed together. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Collier," he said at last. "Yeah. He was a careful man, doing careful work. He deserved to finish it." This was, for Wolfe, a remarkably direct expression of something that wasn't analysis. I let it stand without comment, which seemed right. "The stone is recovered," Wolfe said, returning to his usual register. "Miss Marsh's firm is intact. The criminal enterprise is exposed, if not yet fully prosecuted. The individuals directly responsible for Collier's death are in custody." He opened his eyes. "That is a satisfactory result." "You didn't solve it in one brilliant room," I pointed out. "It took multiple rooms." "The room this morning," he said, "was merely confirmatory. The solving was done here, at this desk on Thursday evening." He looked at me with the calm certainty of a man who has never found false modesty more than ornamental. The conclusion was correct. The evidence confirmed it. That is how it should work. And Renner and Lenz will be prosecuted. Forsyth will negotiate. The European investor will be the subject of extended international proceedings that will occupy prosecutors on 3 continents for the next several years. These things take time. He reached for his book. What matters is that it is no longer our problem. Monday came around with the indifference to drama that Mondays typically show. The Orinoco Star was back in Geneva, restored to its owner. The legal machinery was in motion on multiple fronts. My files on the case were complete and organized, which always gives me a particular satisfaction, not because I expect to need them again, but because a case properly recorded is a case properly closed. Vivian Marsh came at 10 a.m. She sat in the red chair and looked, for the first time since I'd met her, like a woman who had slept adequately. The green eyes were still sharp, but the controlled tension that had been there from the first moment had been replaced by something quieter. Not peace exactly, but relief doing the work that peace would do eventually. She paid the remaining balance of Wolfe's fee by check, which she wrote without looking at the amount. Then she sat for a moment with the checkbook in her lap. "Edmund figured it out," she said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "He should have called the police the moment he suspected. Instead, he investigated himself and told no one except me, and only in the vaguest terms, because he didn't want me involved until he was sure." "He was protecting you," Wolfe said. "Men who are methodical and capable often believe that the right amount of preparation will eliminate the possibility of being caught off guard. They are sometimes correct. Collier was not, in this instance, correct." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that a flaw? The instinct to handle things yourself?" "It is a human instinct," Wolfe said, "and not without merit. It becomes a flaw when the situation is dangerous in ways that individual competence cannot fully address." He looked at her. "Miss Marsh, you came to me promptly and with adequate information. That was the correct instinct. You will do well." She looked at him with those April green eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that without any qualifying reservation." "I know," Wolfe said. "Archie will see you out." After she left, I made coffee. Fritz's, which is to ordinary coffee what a concert hall is to a telephone speaker, and brought a cup to my desk. The morning was bright through the windows, and the city was doing its thing outside, which it was doing with the usual magnificent indifference to what had just been sorted out inside. I thought about Edmund Collier, who had been careful and smart and almost right. Almost is the cruelest possible result, except that in this case the work he'd done, the painstaking documentation, the digital record he'd left on a USB drive taped to the back of a file drawer, had survived him and done the job he'd intended it to do. The prosecutions would cite his work. The convictions, when they came, would rest partly on what he'd built before he ran out of time. There's something in that. Not enough, not nearly enough, but something. I thought about Renner, who had sat in this office and been pleasant in the way that certain dangerous things are pleasant, and Lenz, who had calculated everything except the rate at which Wolfe can cover ground without ever leaving his chair. I thought about Forsyth, who had sat next to Vivian Marsh and expressed sympathy and said she'd been used, which was the kind of performance that deserves a certain grudging professional respect, even when it makes you want to throw something. I thought about the emerald itself, 22 carats of Colombian green, worth enough money to motivate 3 separate people to commit crimes of varying severity, sitting right now in a vault in Geneva, belonging to a man named Hartman, who probably had no idea what his stone had been through. Then I thought about Wolfe, upstairs with his orchids, having solved a murder and recovered a stolen gem and exposed a criminal enterprise, and done all of it from the brownstone, which he prefers to the outside world, in approximately the same way a cathedral prefers to be indoors. I've worked for Nero Wolfe for 14 years. I've watched him do this. This particular thing, the patient accumulation of facts and the slow construction of a logical architecture that eventually becomes unassailable, more times than I can count. It never quite loses its quality of seeming like a trick, even when you've watched every step of it. The trick is that there's no trick. Just an extraordinarily large brain, applied with extraordinary patience to the problem of what actually happened and why. The orchids were probably behaving themselves up there. The gourmet lunch was probably something with mushrooms and wine. The Byzantine coinage book was probably open somewhere nearby. I finished my coffee, pulled the next item from the stack of correspondence, and got back to work.